Hey everyone, my talk today is about embracing spontaneity and how we're about to see a huge shift away from rigid and premeditated products to more ephemeral and context-aware solutions, essentially. My name's Oliver Jones, I'm design principal at Parallel. I'm a self-declared generalist, really, when it comes to design, but my background is rooted in data design, product design, and digital strategy. So here at Parallel, we're an innovation consultancy shaping the future of analytics and decision-making. Fundamentally, what that means is that we build products that help people make better decisions. These can take many different forms, and we're fortunate enough to be pretty much sector agnostic, and we work across all different kind of industries, which is fantastic. And like most of you in the room, we've been thinking quite a lot about how AI impacts digital experiences for quite a while. We're not going to dwell too much on our work today, but one of the more interesting projects recently was called Voices of Tomorrow. And for this project, we partnered with a team of researchers at Royal Holloway to explore more nuanced and multi-dimensional view of decision-making within refugee settlement systems. And what that means really is in an ideal world, every caseworker would have the time to spend and sit face-to-face with refugees and help them kind of get a placement that suits them in the UK. But unfortunately, obviously, you might understand, due to the scale of the issues, this isn't always possible. And what they're left with to make a decision on someone's future essentially looks like this, like a grid of kind of somewhat arbitrary numbers, which isn't great, right? So at the time, there was a relatively new area of analytics being discussed, and Gartner actually introduced this concept of augmented analytics, which is the use of enabling technologies such as machine learning and AI to assist with data preparation, insight generation, and insight explanation. So for this project, we're essentially looking at ways to employ that technique through a few combinations of a few things. First being simulation modeling. And what I'm talking about here really is we're not just calculating the decisions and displaying them as an arbitrary number, but we're visualizing how those decisions are made and kind of exposing how the weighting of those decisions and any biases involved with them, and visualizing them in a way that can be kind of interrogated by people in a bit more detail to really understand what's happening behind the scenes of these decisions. And then in addition to visualizing those results as numerical figures in the interface, we also convert those numerical outputs into prompts to feed something like ChatGPT. And really what we're trying to do here is to generate a much more human response from a series of numbers that can be, a much more empathetic way of reading the data ultimately. And ultimately, what we explored is how can we render these responses into an interface and kind of accompany them with, sorry, I'm going to have to keep talking into the mic, accompanied with synthetic humans, so looking at kind of meta-humans to kind of render the playback of that information. And again, the goal of this was to create a sense of empathy with the caseworkers and the sort of applicants, essentially. And we kind of know that this can't replace sitting in the room with someone, but we think this kind of way of working with AI is a huge leap on from kind of judging someone's future by basically a spreadsheet, right? So just a little bit of an insight as to kind of some of the projects we've been using AI with. So I think we're all aware of the explosion of products that help us explore ideas and synthesize content in new ways. And then we're also in the midst of an explosion of products that help us design and build those products, right? So there's kind of a lot going on in this space. A few that apply particularly to the creative phase of product design, and some that I've kind of used over the last few months. Just in introduction, there's one called Galileo, which is a prompt-based interface for kind of design and refinement, which is really, really interesting. If you haven't tried it yet, there's like an early beta. It's pretty fascinating what it can come up with on the fly. There's one called Genius.design, which is actually recently acquired by Figma. Some of you might be aware of this. It's basically a co-pilot designed to sit alongside you as you're working while designing and kind of introduce new concepts and ideas. If you put a certain component in a certain place, it will kind of recognize the pattern and introduce them in real time while you're designing. And then there's another one called Genius, and kind of makes me think that they should probably use GPT to think of some more unique names. It analyzes your designs based on consumer profiles, and it kind of assesses the appeal of any sort of ad campaigns or designs that you're working on before you even go live. So you can kind of reduce the need for things like A/B testing and kind of user testing potentially with this kind of combination of products. So you're kind of seeing right from the very kind of inception of an idea all the way through to refining and testing, all just with like plugins in an interface, which is pretty interesting. So these tools are kind of fast tracking our design process and the products that we're designing. But it's kind of our opinion that AI will only take us so far if we're applying this logic to the traditional way of thinking about products. So we'll be able to build them faster and arguably better, but the products we're building at the end of this thing are fundamentally still premeditated. We're thinking about a solution to deliver in the future for usually numerous people at the same time. They're usually set to a rigid set of features and functionality. So these are determined by us or stakeholders, essentially. And then they're built for the lowest common denominator. So we do like hours and hours of user testing, user research to come up with a matrix of features that kind of apply to some people, kind of apply to some others, and often we're trying to build those for the cheapest cost. So apart from beating others to market and making more money, applying AI products to our traditional way of traditional way of approaching products, will it really move the needle? An argument is kind of no. I think if we did that, users will still end up kind of building their own solutions. And I imagine most of our phones look something like this, and we probably only use about 5 to 10% of the features in each of those apps. We kind of curate our own kind of worlds with the applications that are available off the shelf to us. I know people that use about 4 different note-taking apps to kind of build their perfect solution, right? And it's kind of that one-size-fits-all thing. I think it's time to maybe think about this in a different way. So we've got thousands of apps, each solving a micro problem in a complete information silo. And I think the power of AI can potentially help us move on from that and usher in a seismic shift in how we think about products in general. So to make that leap, and frankly, to keep up with the technology that's kind of in progress at the moment, we need to abandon the idea of an app and start thinking about ephemeral solutions. It's not quite as catchy as an app, right? But so what is an ephemeral solution? So it starts with a query or a request, and that is a real-time capture of user intent. So rather than denoting and predicting everyone's user needs down the line, it happens there and then, as and when that person needs that particular solution. It combines this with physical and digital context, so situational information that refines the prompt, and then combines that with any personal information we have on that particular user. So this could be, I don't know, the calendar. There could be their personal preferences on particular subjects regarding that particular prompt. And ultimately, we can maybe start thinking about real-time deployment of a solution. So just enough, just in time, basically, and stop thinking about features that need to be and suit every single user. This isn't a new idea necessarily. We were lucky enough to work on a project a couple of years ago where we were tasked to reimagine how the interface looks for drivers. And kind of the idea was to move away from this like static representation of data and think about how we can make this more ephemeral and more kind of real time. And even today, now, and this was a project that was kind of 4 or 5 years ago potentially, maybe not quite that long. You have to run me the dates. Even today's thinking, this is Apple's latest kind of render of what they think a car should look like, and all they've really done is replace digital dials with software solutions, right? Which is great, it looks cool, I wouldn't mind it in my car. We're not going to go deep dive into this project, but essentially where we ended up was we completely moved away from that multitude of static components and more towards only representing actionable information when it was required. So, based on the driver's preferences, based on location, based on the destination, we can render stuff in real time and more in an ephemeral format. But even with this project, there's still a refined, finite idea of an experience that's meant for mass market. So we're still in that framework of thinking about building one thing for everyone. The features themselves are more ephemeral, but the experience isn't. So how do we push it further? And this is a bit of more of a thought experiment. This isn't a real project, but it's something that we've been thinking about a lot in parallel. So if you take something like Strava, what would your tracking of one look like in a world without apps and without off-the-shelf solutions? So we can revisit that process that we talked about a second ago. It starts with a query, leaving the house for a run. So it doesn't matter how this is captured. It can be automated based on the wearable. It can be, your home knows that you're leaving. It recognizes what running gear you're wearing. It doesn't really matter, but the fact is that it triggers the request to build something in a spontaneous manner. And we combine that with a physical and digital context. This could be captured by, again, on-person devices, location, weather, all the sort of standard metadata that you expect to be available in a real-time internet. And then we add the personal context into that. I'm running a marathon on the 15th of October. I've got some commitments later on today. I know that I need to be back at a certain time. I know that I don't like running down certain streets. From previous expeditions or previous runs, we can potentially combine that knowledge in to the prompt and deliver essentially a real-time solution. It's not an app, it's ephemeral. It exists just for the duration of that run. Any data that is captured during that run is stored into my real-time internet, and it's available for recall later on. But that particular app never exists again. No one user would see the same combination of things. Kind of the idea of designing an interface in this scenario doesn't really apply because, we don't need to design all the features for someone to navigate to the button that says to track my run. It can just potentially do it in real time. And again, we're thinking like years ahead, but I think it's important that we start discussing new approaches to software as early as possible. So we've got AI for ideas, AI for exploration, AI for production, and AI for deployment in the future. Where does that leave us as designers, right? And I think, we've been thinking a lot about this, and I've personally been thinking a lot about and trying to distill what we actually do as designers. And I think it comes down to something like this. You may or may not agree with it, but designers close the gap between changes in technology and how we use it. And how we might do this is going to change. Like, we're no longer going to be using Figma and designing detail in, I think, probably 5 to 10 years, right? We'll transition to making an impact way further up the value chain. And what that means is we'll focus much less on solutions, but we'll start to define the rules, levers, and the worlds that allow our products and visions to exist. And again, this isn't a new idea. It just hasn't happened in the product world just yet. So art and engineering have been at this for years, right? If you think about visual artists, Rafik Anadol, he's all over Instagram. It's probably impossible you haven't seen his stuff. He doesn't actually build the work from scratch, right? He sets the rules and parameters. He doesn't have ultimate control of the outcome, but he decides when the solution is correct, and that's his design input. He's saying, yes, this is correct, I'm moving forward with this. Not going to dwell too much on Midjourney, I'm sure we're all using it in this room, but how powerful it's become, and again, it's about creating the rules and criteria for a solution to exist. We're not actually defining the solution manually. We're still doing this in design, right? We're still manually creating buttons. We're still manually doing everything. And then, kind of a bit of a side note, in engineering, we're defining the success criteria for how strong, how efficient, how cheap something should be, and using generative design to kind of push out variations and outputs. But ultimately, as humans, we still have the design input of saying, yes, this is correct, this meets our criteria. And I think that is something that, and how designers, product designers in particular, will move into, and less away from the detail. We're starting to see rumblings of this movement. So one early example is a tool called Builder.ai. It's kind of early doors, but it allows users to talk with an AI system to design code and launch an application using a set of predetermined frameworks. So those frameworks are the levers that I'm talking about. We're designing for other designers to design in our products rather than designing the solutions themselves. And another example is one called Vocal Flow, which is a bit meta, but it allows UX designers to create their own conversational assistants with the help of a conversational assistant. And again, it allows people to jump into that and create a solution within a set of rules in a kind of contained universe. I think, just some closing thoughts. I think that's the direction that we're aiming for. And there's kind of a nice expression that I heard, that design itself is talent plus time. And if we were to essentially replace those aspects of that equation, so if talent is taken by ideation and technical ability software, or AIs, and production AIs take over the time aspect and eliminate that part of the problem, what's left? Well, I think there's kind of a word missing, which is the word taste. And I think that's something inherently human about the word taste. And I think it's our commitment to taste and our judgment as to what works for us as humans that will keep designers working for years to come. For that reason, I think design will probably be commoditized a lot more. And those with taste but without skill are enabled to design and contribute towards the ideas for our world as well. Those without skill but no taste, but maybe not so much. So I think we should embrace this shift for our spontaneous future and worry less about trying to build one-size-all-fits solutions and spend far less time solving the same problems over and over again. Not really sure how many buttons I've got left in me, to be honest with you. Hopefully that will free up the bandwidth for us to focus on newer, harder, and more real-world problems. And potentially, and this is a slightly more utopian perspective, we can free up some of our best creative minds to focus on the really, really big stuff. But yeah, thank you. That's everything. We are hiring. We have positions open for front-end developers and product managers at the moment. There's loads of us here. We're sat at the back. Myself, Hem, Christian. Yeah, come and chat to us afterwards. We'd love to, get to know you. But yeah, thank you so much.